DJ LeRoy.
Watchman, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. Monday evening in the city to be.
We are back. So this is going to be a pretty interesting show.
We got not one but two doctors. You know, sometimes we come twice as nice, man.
That's right. That's right. So we are going to be talking about
the big C, the big
in
C,
New York State,
That's
the
right.
cannabis social equity, and is it happening the way it's supposed to be? And we have some experts with some strong opinions, and I think this is going to be pretty good.
All right. So Night Watchman, get it popping, man.
All right. So first off, new to Soul Lounge Primetime, we have Dr. Mikhail DeVeaux of the Cannabis Social Equity Coalition. Welcome to Soul Lounge Primetime.
Hey, thank you. Thank you for bringing me and inviting me to this conversation. Should be a wonderful evening.
You got it.
Next off, a returning guest, we have Damian Fagon from the Cannabis Association of New York,
or
otherwise
CANY.
known as CANY.
Hey, how y'all doing?
That's right. That's right.
Yes.
And last but certainly not least, Dr. Stephen Robinson, president of the Society of Cannabis Clinicians. Welcome back, Dr. Steve.
Yes.
Glad to be here.
Absolutely. So, gentlemen, you know what? We're going to get this bad boy popping. We're going to get it hard. So, being that you're the first new to Soul Lounge Primetime, Dr. Mikhail DeVeaux, please do tell us your involvement, your journey in the cannabis space.
And tell us a little bit about the Cannabis Social Equity Coalition.
Well, I'm from Harlem.
All right. Okay.
I was born in Harlem.
All right.
I lived on 116th Street between 8th and Manhattan during that day, as they say, back in the days, you know, when Harlem was considered to be the drug capital of the world. The place where I lived on the block where they made movies in terms of American Gangster and all those people represented and that kind of stuff. That's the era that I was raised in as a young person. So in terms of my involvement, you know, the whole, well, let me just say this here, you know, the drug war was part of a response to what some might characterize as drug culture in terms of the lifestyle that was emerging during the 60s and early 70s. And so, you know, like many other Black men, I spent a significant amount of time in prison. And as a result of, I mean, you know, so I'm part of everything that the legislation seeks to redress in terms of the harm that has emerged from beginning with the war on drugs from Nixon and his guy in the White House, and then the Rockefeller drug laws, and then the stop and frisk and the whole scenario. So that's basically, you know, some background information in terms of my involvement. But, you know, since, you know, being released from prison, as you can see, you know, we went back to school, we got a PhD, and we are primarily concerned with issues that affect Black men. And then the legislation that pretty much described as, you know, the groups that have been, you know, most harmed by, you know, this whole legislation and the war on drugs. So the way we perceive it is that the legislation, you know, and some people have had good intentions, you know, across the country has been an effort to provide some redress, make up for the harm that has been done to primarily Black communities. And so I think that, you know, for me, it was important to at least raise the voices of those that have traditionally been marginalized and silenced and disenfranchised as a result of these activities, because we've seen this playbook before in terms of when sub-economies become part of the mainstream economy, the people that survived based on those sub-economies are kind of not permitted, not kind of, but are not permitted, have not been permitted to benefit from the change in the legislation. We've seen this happening with the from prohibition to taking over the numbers, and now we got, you know, the recreational marijuana piece. So that's kind of a intro, somewhat. My research interest, if you want to, has to, as I said, race relationshiing, disenfranchisement of Black people, race issues, hyper incarceration, which primarily is a phrase that focuses on class, race, and place as being, the way that we should see how a lot of these issues are playing out, or basically who's affected. People from a certain class, people from a certain race, people that live in certain places, certain zip codes, to be specific. So a lot of these activities have to be with us being advocates for ourselves, because as you can see, if you don't say nothing, nobody else will. So that's why I'm here. I guess that's
beautiful.
Enough of an intro.
Thank you, Doc. So, Damian, your journey through the space, and also some innovative things that you're coming up with. Especially, I know that you had conducted a forum done at HPA's offices to bring in, I guess, some growers association to have them as maybe having a relationship with the Black folk in, let's say, a community like Harlem, and them being the source of the product. Tell me more.
Yeah, I mean, my relationship to the plant is as a grower. I started farming hemp in 2017 in South Carolina, and then farmed again here in New York in the Hudson Valley. So yeah, my relationship to the plant has always been through the cultivation of it. That's how I fell in love with it. I've always enjoyed smoking it, but growing it was my introduction to agriculture generally. And so I've always had those relationships with growers upstate. A lot of folks in New York City in the legacy community already know this, but people have been growing weed in upstate New York for 50 years.
Wow.
In the woods, in warehouses and basements and garages. They've been growing in the Bronx too, but a lot of distributors have been distributing stuff. There's always been relationships between people in the city and people upstate growing weed. A lot of the genesis of cannabis in New York State started with hemp. And so it kind of grew out of a lot of stuff that the hemp farmers were already doing upstate. That isn't to say that the hemp farmers represent what cannabis is in New York State. It just means that they've been growing it, and they are going to be in the legal adult use market. And so a lot of the genesis of my work and my thinking around this was connecting the class interests of farmers upstate in rural isolated communities with the interests of Black and brown entrepreneurs in the city. It's not a conversation that folks have ever really had to have before. And the Harlem Business Alliance was one of the first places where we ended up hosting that interaction. Nice. And it hasn't been easy, and it will continue to be difficult in some cases, but that isn't to mean that it's not worth it. I think that in the absence of those conversations, who makes up for that lack of communication and lack of understanding between upstate and downstate are large cannabis corporations.
Gotcha.
If they're not talking to each other, if they're not aligned, I mean, if the farmers upstate are not talking to the folks in the city, the people in the middle of that conversation, have neither one's interests at heart and are gonna take over. And so that's kind of the bridge that I've been at the center of, just because I was a hemp farmer living in the city and I traveled to and from the city to grow cannabis. And so yeah, that's basically how I work with the plant in this. I teach cannabis cultivation at Medgar Evers College.
Yeah, tell me about that. Is this the only one in the city and state? Tell me about this.
Yes, the first one in the city of New York.
Nice.
The first time anyone's got a college accredited cannabis cultivation class in the city of New York. They've got a dozen or so upstate at SUNY schools and other schools. And this is picking up. A lot of for-profit colleges are adding cannabis cultivation, cannabis stuff to their academic offerings, because it's such a significant financial opportunity for them, because there are no CUNY schools or SUNY schools that are really being funded to teach this stuff to our low-income young people. And I went to Medgar Evers College wanting to teach this because it's an HBCU and because it's so underfunded,
Yep.
And because that community deserves the first shot at cannabis, generally. Half my class is Jamaican, which is like probably my favorite thing about it. My dad's real proud of that. But yeah, we started the first course about 3 or 4 weeks ago, or 4 weeks ago. We had some of the guest lectures we've had are some of the best black and brown growers from across the country have wanted to come in and drop in and talk to the students about. We had a guy, a legacy grower from the Bronx who's been growing weed in the Bronx for the last 10 years, come to our class like 2 nights ago and talk about what it's been like to grow weed in apartments in the Bronx for the last 10 years. And he's basically running like a high-end, compliant science laboratory cultivation room that people in the legal market don't even have. He has some of the equipment that they don't even have. And so he was able to drop a lot of knowledge on the students the other night.
Nice. Very nice. Dr. Robinson.
Indeed.
Do tell, and I'm assuming that you're on this side of the coast, huh?
I am.
Okay. So,
yeah.
Well,
I guess, as you know, I've been engaged on the West Coast, on California, for the past, over 12 years now as a cannabis clinician, evaluating patients for the use of medicinal cannabis. As you know, California was the first state in the union that legalized the medicinal use of cannabis back in 1996, which is, I guess, the resurgence of medicinal cannabis in the country. And as you all know, this substance has been used as a medicinal for over 5,000 years, documented in ancient Egyptian and Chinese medical texts thousands of years ago. It was just back in the 1800s where an Irish physician went to India for the British East India Company and discovered the use of medicinal cannabis in India. Studied it, tried it out himself, watched the clinical application in India, wrote a textbook on it, came back to England with seeds and started opening up his own clinics and shops. And his medical treatises led to the use of medicinal cannabis here in this country back in the 1840s. So you'd see that cannabis was part of the U.S. pharmacopoeia back in 1840s up until about 100 years later, until it was suppressed by the drug laws, Harry Anslinger and the Food and Drug Administration and the beginnings of the drug war even before Nixon. But it was a patient-led movement where patients themselves had documented the benefit of cannabis, returning veterans from Vietnam, cancer patients with multiple sclerosis, had undeniable benefits from the use of this medicinal. And that led to the patient movement, which led to the legislation. So it's always been a kind of a movement from the ground up in terms of medicinal cannabis. And once people recognized that it actually had, quote unquote, legitimate medical benefits, they began to investigate it, and that took off in the late 60s with the discovery of the structure of THC, tetrahydrocannabinol, which was the psychoactive compound. And when science had advanced, the technology in medical science had advanced enough so that they could actually label these molecules and find out where they were affecting different parts of the body, they found out that the receptors for this chemical were all over the body: the brain, nervous system, the gut, the spleen, and in bone, in immune cells. And that led to the discovery in the late 1980s and 90s of a whole new physiologic system called the endocannabinoid system, which we had never even appreciated in the past. So the research now is proceeding apace internationally in terms of looking at the endocannabinoid system and its impact on any number of things. And we've discovered, in fact, that the endocannabinoid system not only exists in humans and other primates, but also in the animal kingdom all the way down to invertebrates. And it's been in existence in evolution for over 600 million years.
Wow.
So it's been an incredible learning journey Medical science is learning a lot more and more about this compound, and I'm interested from the medical standpoint, but also the political and economic standpoint, because with the resurgence, first medical and now recreational, we're beginning to understand that all of those myths and lies that had enabled law enforcement to perpetrate the war on drug, which is actually the war on drug users. We realize a lot of those justifications. It's highly addictive, that it's a gateway drug, that it causes the dissolution of families, etc. The worst thing about the drug use was getting caught using the drugs.
Right.
And so we realized that there were a lot of myths, but now medical science is hopefully trying to disabuse all of those in the public sphere and bring some light to this darkness. But we're watching the foundation of a fundamental industry, which can be as large as, if not larger than, Silicon Valley. And I think there are a lot of social equity concerns, and I'm glad we're having this topic discussed now.
Well, then, gentlemen, please, what does equity look like? In your mind, Dr. DeVeaux, what does equity look like? How will we know that we've achieved that?
You're on mute.
I was saying it doesn't look like what it's shaping up to look like now. Among the things that we are seeing is the legislation and how, I guess, the recommendations and policies are rolling out seem to kind of contradict each other. For example, you have a legislation that suggests that there is an effort to redress some of the harms that have been experienced by Black people in particular as a result of, as the doctor said, these laws. And so among the things that have been promised in the legislation is that 50% of all 8-9 licensing categories should be allotted to the quote unquote social equity group. One of the provisions in the legislation is that special priority should be given to the groups that have been most harmed by the legislation. The most harmed groups have, of course, been, those Black and subsequently other communities of color. And what you'll see is that, for example, we have been harmed economically, we've been harmed politically, as the doctor alluded to, because of the collateral consequences and the visible punishments that have been related to these so-called justice policies. So what we're seeing is that people that have money are still in a position to make most of the money as this thing is currently rolling out. Even this legislation that was passed wherein the hemp farmers benefited. Not saying that people shouldn't benefit, but the legislation prioritizes the most harm. And so an effort to provide people with a leg up, assistance that are not even mentioned in the legislation suggests that the people that are developing these particular policies are really going in another direction. A lot of things that I personally see as a result of some of the things that have come out is a relegation of Black people to consumers and mainly of the drug, and not facilitating positioning Black people from the seed to sale. Right. For example, Damian already mentioned, legacy growers, and the conversation that I've had, it seems like it's going to be very difficult for a lot of legacy growers to even transition to the legitimate market because of the, some of the way some of these regulations are rolling out. So I don't see the equity as promised. It hasn't happened in, you read about what has been happening in other states, and the people that the legislation, again, seems to be, designed to help the most are having a hard time getting on, not on first base, but out of the batter's box. Even in the batter's box. So equity, I'm not seeing it yet. I'm seeing a lot of talk, a lot of nice things on paper, but in terms of the rollout, not seeing it.
Wow. And Damian, please weigh in. But also, Damian, please answer this. So I know that your pops has some land in Jamaica. And let's say if cannabis market in Jamaica, do we, people of color, black folk, do we control that market there in Jamaica, or is it the same sad story?
Oh man, I can't really bring that up.
I got you.
This is literally what got me into cannabis. I was in Jamaica working with farmers, castor oil farmers. I don't know if you guys know of Jamaican black castor oil, but Jamaican black castor oil is a really popular product with black women in the States for hair care. None of it comes from Jamaica.
Wow.
It all comes from India. And because Jamaica black castor oil was never copywritten or given a geographical indicator, which is like a legal protection, they can make it in India, dye it black, and call it Jamaican black castor oil and sell it on Amazon.
Wow.
And so I was working on that, trying to figure out a way to get that industry back in Jamaica. And I was there at the same time they legalized cannabis. There's obviously a lot of excitement in Jamaica about cannabis because of the cultural affiliation, because of the Rastafarian religion, because of how the islands, the tourism generally, like people coming there and buying cannabis. That already happens, but they were hoping that this would happen at like regulated stores. The government could get tax dollars to reinvest in the community, instead of going to gangs, basically the gangs that are in Montego Bay and the Grill. But so over the course of 2 or 3 years since they announced that, in 2017, 2018, I was keeping track of it. All the companies that had been licensed had pretty much been bought by Canadian cannabis companies.
Wow.
So Jamaica has already lost its cannabis industry before it even started. They had a law, they had a provision that said that 51% of the ownership had to be held by Jamaicans themselves. But there's an easy workaround there with management contracts that basically state that all the profits will flow to the Canadian company if they invest this much money. And there's ways around that equity conversation that any high-paying law firm could figure out. And they figured it out, and it really upset me, and so that's kind of what led me into thinking more about social equity in cannabis here in the States, because it's the same playbook that these big cannabis companies use here with social equity applicants. They sign them to terrible deals that essentially, all the profits from their work and their business will flow to them in perpetuity. For an upfront licensing fee or a licensing deal or upfront payment. You'll give you $1 million now, but your license essentially is owned by them for the next 10, 20 years. And it'll be too expensive for you ever to buy your way out of that deal. So I am not as skeptical as the doctor is at where social equity is right now. Just given the fact that we haven't seen the regulations, the industry hasn't actually started yet. I am skeptical generally that the state is going to be able to pull off what they're promising to pull off, but I can't say that they've done anything aside from the hemp bill, which I could talk about more specifically. I didn't support it. It did come out of my association, and it's not equity, but it's also something that happened at the legislature outside of the MRTA. The MRTA has yet to be implemented, really. Like, there's no regulations yet. The hemp bill, licensed farmers to grow cannabis first. And it's not a lot. It's 3 black farms are included in that, who I've been working with to make sure that they're up on the policies and ready to grow in May. But
3 out of how many?
3
out of how many?
Like 150.
That's not equity.
Actually, like the crazy thing about it is that it's actually, the national number is 2% of all farms, 1 to 2% of all farmers are black in the United States. That actually is like pretty much the same number we're seeing with the hemp bill. And the point I made when we were considering this hemp bill is that when the hemp bill was rolled out in 2016, I was one of the first Black farms to get licensed under that pilot program. You actually could not have a criminal record and get a hemp license. So it was already it was already keeping that community out of the hemp industry. And now that same industry is the one that gets to grow first. It's not a good thing. It's something that should be opposed. But as the doctor mentioned, the governor signed it. Crystal Stokes' office pushed it, and I can talk a little bit more about why it's better than some alternative scenarios, because this is ultimately what's going to keep happening, is that social equity is in the middle, and there are different parties who are making the argument that if I do get to do this, it'll be good for social equity. Big corporate cannabis companies make that argument. The hemp farmers make that argument. A lot of other interested parties will make that argument. They will talk about social equity as something that needs to be prioritized, that their success is connected to.
Can I
jump
in just one second, Damian? And see, that's the problem, as he's clearly, articulating. People are making policies regarding people and not allowing them to even participate in the discussion.
Wow. Yeah.
And so it's, again, the people that the legislation is supposed to assist are finding it difficult at every turn. Not only that, the way that they are conceptualized and treated is as if they're being relegated, as with this $200 million funding for dispensaries, to low-level kind of activities, limiting, and also it seems that this $200 million limits the social equity group to just dispensary kind of stuff.
Hold on. I do want to say this is one of the biggest mistakes that the state's making right now, because they actually have plans to do social equity funds for each license. They started with dispensaries because that's going to be the most important business to start by this October, November, December. They have to get the stores up and running so people can start selling product. There's a cultivation fund that they're going to announce. They should have announced it with the hemp bill. That's going to have, if not more money. The problem is that these are investment funds, and each investment fund has to be specifically allocated for a business, because that business has different profit and loss and revenue projections. So they can't mix the money for dispensaries with cultivation, which is a much riskier business, which is probably why it's taking so long for them to announce it. But they also plan to build facilities for social equity growers, and finance their businesses as well. I believe they're just having trouble locking in that money like they did with the dispensaries, because the dispensaries are actually the most profitable business in any mature market. They're the most valuable. But if you have a dispensary in Manhattan, Brooklyn, you have something that's going to be guaranteed making $5 million a year in revenue in perpetuity, and you could scale it up. New Yorkers buy a lot of weed, and there's going to be a lot of growers. There's going to be a lot of competition on the growing side. It's a risky business, and it's not that profitable. That isn't to say that social equity shouldn't be in there. Social equity should be 50% of the cultivation space. But I don't want people to think that dispensaries aren't the most profitable business, because that's what every VC big cannabis company wants. They want a dispensary license in Manhattan.
Yeah, well, we got to let the other doctor get in, but it's easier for bigger people when they control from seed to sale. You know what I mean? If you're controlling every aspect, wherein, for example, how much does it cost to buy some seeds and then to plant them and reap the benefit from, those initial costs?
But, I think we need to put this in a whole sort of like national context, in terms of how the whole legalization rolled out, first starting with medicinal, and then after they had a chance to look at medicinal and realize that the sky wasn't going to fall, and then there were other people edging into adult use. The whole social equity piece served as a kind of a fig leaf, and that was unavoidable.
Yeah.
And we live in a monopoly capitalist economy, and we understand the dynamics. Big fish always going to eat little fish.
Yeah.
And the only way to oppose that is to have activist people on the ground tirelessly fighting with the legislature at every turn on every provision that's in this bill to hold their feet to the fire. We know that the legislators are prone to receiving big cash donations to their election funds from all these corporate interests if they'd only sort of like insert this particular piece in the legislation or not. And, you know, nobody on the ground, very few people who look like us are going to have that disposable income to weigh on that side of the scale. So we have to use our numbers. We have to use the history of the particularized oppression that was utilized under the wars on drugs as justifications, continual justifications to redress those community harms. Now, you know, if you look at the kinds of fig leaves that have been put in place across the states, actually on the ground, New York is held up as one of the leaders that has the most progressive social equity legislation, at least on paper, compared to any of the other states. So you can understand how bad the situation is.
Gotcha.
Florida had a situation where when they opened up, they gave lip service to social equity. And, you know, out of all of the farms in Florida, the Black-owned farms in Florida, none of them had access to get any of those growing licenses because they put in the legislation in Florida that you had to have a nursery in operation for at least 30 years to even be eligible.
Wow.
And that excluded all of the Black farmers. That was later struck down. And so now the Black farmers had one application, one license available for them to get out of all the farmers in the state.
I want to say that this is the crux of cannabis legalization and why it's in such a difficult situation with statewide rollouts. The only reason cannabis is like this big money churning, profitable industry that everyone is looking at and trying to get into is because the state tightly controls who can be in it. And large companies recognize that they can do regulatory capture. They can go into Florida and be like, oh, you only need 4 companies to do all the cannabis in Florida. So just give it to us, we'll handle it. And so that's what's happening in Illinois. That's what happened in Illinois. That's what happened in Virginia 2 weeks ago. They've only got 4 cannabis companies that are going to dominate the whole thing. And they're going to like maybe give out little social equity deals here and there. But that's why everyone sees cannabis as a big profitable thing, because they recognize the ability to control the state, to control the licensing, to limit who can play, to limit competition. And so that causes a lot of folks here in New York to look at cannabis like, oh, it's this big profitable industry. Like, no, it's actually very easy to grow cannabis. It's pretty easy to sell it. The only reason it's profitable is because the state controls who can get in it. And so one of the best things possible for social equity and for, you know, the goals of the MRTA, uncap licenses. Let anyone who wants to start a cannabis business start a cannabis business. Prioritize the most harm to go first. Give them a head start, maybe 3 years. But don't cap licenses, because as soon as you cap licenses, it turns into this real estate game where people are buying each other, they're consolidating, they're trying to lobby the government to limit like whoever can have licenses. I will say, like just last week, there's a Cannabis Industry Association in Illinois that is predominantly all the big cannabis companies, Curaleaf, Columbia Care, all that.
Cresco.
Yeah, Cresco. There's 30 social equity growers in Illinois, and they're capped at 5,000 square feet of canopy. So that's how much cannabis plants they can grow. Basically, there's a bill in the Illinois State Senate that would increase that canopy cap to 14,000 square feet. So guess who opposed that publicly and is lobbying against it? Those big cannabis companies, that industry association in Illinois, Curaleaf, Columbia Care, Cresco. They're literally lobbying to keep social equity at 5,000 square feet of canopy publicly. They're not even ashamed to do it, because if everyone's able to grow cannabis, it's not profitable for them to even do this. It's not profitable for them to build these 1 million square foot facilities with all these staff and to reap all these profits and send it back to their shareholders. If we uncap licenses and let whoever wants to grow, it's not as profitable and sexy of an industry for all these VCs to try and capture.
Well, that's like the example of MedMen here in New York. They bought out a medical license from a non-performing license holder, and then as soon as they got their foot in the door, they turned around and wanted to lobby the legislature not to allow patients to grow their own medicine.
Yep.
And
Wow.
it's just
So we're seeing the same. Yeah.
Understand the monopoly impulse, and you know that it's always going to be there. And I think don't ever that's the default position. The monopoly position is going to be there. So we have to array all of the focus on counteracting that. We know it's going to be there. We know they're going to try to have these shell companies that actually lock in, their control of these licenses, even under social equity. All of these big companies, Curaleaf, Cresco, they've already developed what they call as their social equity programs. And I think, in terms of allowing them access to the New York market, there should be very stringent and tough criteria about what qualifies, according to New York State, as a social equity program, so that they can put more teeth into that kind of compliance. Now, as I understand it, the hemp law itself had some social equity provisions.
Yeah, I can talk about that for a second, because
that the growers had to comply with in order to be able to move into the adult market. I don't know the specifics. I'm sure Damian or Mikhail know more about that. I'd like to hear about that.
Yeah,
but,
just real quickly.
but before we get
ahead,
in that, I just want to get in basically a promo because the Cannabis Social Equity Coalition is hosting a press conference next week in Albany, or really tomorrow in Albany, Tuesday, March 8th, 2022. It's at the West Capitol Park, New York State Office Building, steps at the Swan Street entrance. And so I just want to make sure we got that information. We're going to repeat it again at the end. But it's important that if people are cannabis activists and can get to Albany, that this is something that you should participate in. And so you can use this contact information for more information, but I just wanted to get that in there early so let's continue with our discussion.
Yeah, just one more point, because we've been highlighting capitalism as part of the problem, but we need to couple capitalism with racism and white supremacy, because it still seems like the way a lot of the stuff is playing out in an effort to kind of, it seems to me, reinforce, continue to let stand a kind of master-slave kind of relationship. Even the way I think about the way things are playing out, with upstate and downstate, it seems like the whole North and South kind of issue. And that's traditionally been one of the problems in New York. You got upstate New Yorkers have a different interest in terms of that which is related to downstate New Yorkers.
There's a lot of Black people in Buffalo and Rochester.
Exactly.
I got that piece, but I'm just saying in general, the upstate and the downstate people are not on the same page. What they seem to be attempting to do is to relegate, again, this is what it seems like with the dispensary licenses, relegate the Black population to just being consumers. And as you said, there are only three people in this group that are bona fide Black people that are in this even in this what is that, the hemp group?
But so there are hundreds of Black growers who are planning to apply in the general application period for indoor grow, legacy grow. I'm working with a legacy grower in the Bronx who wants to open a 30,000 square foot growing facility in the Hudson Valley. Like there's a lot of Black cultivators who are coming back to the Bronx from California, who are prepping for the application period in August to be growers. And that's who people are ultimately going to want to buy weed from. The hemp growers are not going to grow good weed that people want to buy. They're also not going to grow smokable weed. They're going to grow biomass, the stuff that goes in distillate. They will be able to meet 10%, 20% of the market demand. And so there's still so much of the market up for grabs for Black growers. And I'll say that with the hemp bill, the provision in there that is social equity is substantive. It's not something to just like kind of ignore and be like, it's nothing. What we tried to do when I realized that bill was probably going to pass no matter what I did, is just, if you're going to make this conditional license available to hemp farmers, do a 1-for-1 and make the same path to licensing, to cultivation licensing, available to Black growers, to social equity growers, to legacy growers. And so the point of that training program that's outlined in the bill is if you participate in a part-time 3-month compliance training program, that you can leave that program with the same conditional cultivation license that the hemp farmers were given.
You see now, so and all I can say is, if it's not in writing, it ain't really happening. You know what I mean? And so,
the governor signed it a week ago. It could happen.
No, I'm not talking about I'm talking about that other piece. You know what I mean? Where you go to a 3-month class, and you come out of that class with a particular license.
Yeah.
And I'm saying, if it ain't in writing, it ain't really happening. You know what I mean?
In terms of the provisions, as the hemp growers have a license right now to grow hemp, and from one of the cursory readings I have of that hemp law, in order for those existing hemp growers to transition into the adult market, are they required to work with a social equity applicant to help them get into the market? Is that a requirement for them being able to then get into the adult market?
It's a requirement. So the one thing I didn't want was hemp farmers to be teaching legacy growers, Black people, how to grow cannabis, because the hemp farmers don't even know how to grow cannabis.
But is that in there?
So it's the requirement is that their facilities and their sites be made available for this training program. Like, the state has access to their site, their land, their facilities, to bring trainees, to bring people in to see and learn how to do it.
But we don't need, but as you clearly said, people, they don't need the hemp farmers for that. You know what I mean?
You need to see a plant, a THC plant. Like, they're going to be only legal plants in the state with the compliance. So you have to tag each plant. You have to track it with the tracker. Like, it's just a software tracking system that they have to teach people how to use if they're going to be able to grow cannabis in the state of New York. And the only people who will be doing it this May, June, July are the hemp farmers. And so the bill just basically says that their properties, the licensed property, the state can drop in whenever they want with people to study how they're doing stuff. And listen, again, I'm not going to defend that bill as something that's equity. Mm-hmm. I'm saying that this is coalition building. This is compromise. Yeah. They pushed that through. And we said, well, if you're going to push that through, then you have to give a 1-for-1, make this same path available in the future to Black growers, to legacy growers. And I want to say that the conditional license, the reason they asked us, I mean, when we were talking about this bill with legislators a long time ago, how can we make this conditional available to legacy growers growing right now? People who are growing in the Bronx or growing in upstate, growing weed anywhere. The problem is, how do they legally define what a legacy grower is, so that they can just write a legislation and all these people will qualify? They could write a legislation, and if you meet the condition of hemp farming and you have a licensed hemp farmer, you successfully harvested for 2 years, the conditions are met, you qualify. We couldn't come up with a definition that would have been the same for legacy growers. Legacy growers who, by profession, have tried to hide their footprint, have tried to hide who they are, have tried to leave no trace that they're growing weed. There just was no legal definition that anyone could agree on that wouldn't result in a million lawsuits to get that, to move that forward. And so,
you know what, on that same point, we were having a conversation about incentive for the legacy market to even get to move into this other space. It would seem like it was, what's the point?
Taxes and to do all that compliance paperwork, to get those lawyers to write that application.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, I was with a bunch of legacy guys last night in Brooklyn, and they were saying the same thing. Why would we go through all this? We're making money now. But I will say the fear on the other side, and a couple of them expressed this, that they're going to be left behind. That that 5 years from now, the legal industry will subsume the unregulated market, and that they.
I've been in conversation with some people from Canada, and that's not what's happening in Canada. In Canada, the underground market is booming.
Yeah,
and
California's booming too.
Yeah, and the above ground market is being plagued by all these issues that we've been talking about. So
they're growing terrible weed.
That is what's happening. But what is also going to happen eventually is that instead of having a war on drugs, with all of these legitimate licensed industries realizing that their profits are being undercut by the legacy market, they're going to weaponize the legal jurisdictions, the legal
No, you're absolutely right. They're doing that already. They're doing
to recriminalize
Yeah.
those legacy markets.
They're doing that in New York already to some degree.
The state will now be in the position now of defending the legal industry, and those people will be hounded out of business.
Yeah.
Yep, that's how this works. And this is something that I told the hemp farmers that, if you guys are going to get these conditional licenses, I don't want to hear a year or 2 years from now, you guys are out here lobbying for limited licensing and for criminalizing the underground because they're eating into your profits. That's how this usually works. Like the people who start getting licensed, they start seeing money come in. Then they start seeing less money come in because of the black market, because of it's happening in California with the legal businesses out there lobbying the state to shut down these legacy grows and to lower the taxes and to limit licensing. And you become an interest group, an industry interest group that is only looking out for the membership that are currently licensed. And so
the legacy market has to do the same thing. They have to look at the long-term impact of this, and they have to organize and mobilize and get their lobbyists together themselves to write that legislation that provides them with an on-ramp into this legitimate space.
And this is the biggest challenge that all these legacy guys are going through right now. And the meeting I was at last night, they were organizing and trying to elect a leader and trying to figure out who's a spokesperson. But you have legacy guys who basically just distribute California cannabis. They bring in a ton of cannabis every day into the city of New York, and they sell that. You have legacy guys who grow in Brooklyn and the Bronx. They're the ones who are probably most at risk for seeing serious jail time. They very rarely identify themselves. Then there's legacy growers who are just like old, crazy white guys in the woods in central New York and Syracuse. Then there's legacy growers in Buffalo and Rochester, the Finger Lakes. And we've been trying, it's almost impossible to unify this group into one singular voice. They have so many different issues. They don't really trust each other. They don't trust the state of New York, understandably. They don't trust us. I wouldn't either. Like, I don't know, like, identify yourself and tell the state that you're doing this. Like, why would they do that? And so it's just an unbelievably complex challenge, unifying that group.
But you can see what's coming, and know what's coming. It's happened in all these other industries.
Yeah, we're saying that they've already begun to criminalize, for example, people have gotten cease and desist orders, in New York City that have these clubs and or shops where people are members and they come in and smoke. You know what I mean? So there's already an effort underway, to even criminalize some of these, I guess we might call them illegal dispensaries or smoke shops.
Yeah, and so we got a complaint from one of our members about this, and it made me look at this a little bit differently. And so there's some shops in upstate New York that are operating in municipalities, counties that have opted out. So they're not going to have legal dispensaries. And these guys want to open up legal dispensaries in their towns. They just want to open up a little shop in their small town they grew up in upstate New York. And these illegal shops are out here operating, not paying taxes. They're giving the industry a bad name in communities that have already rejected the ability to open dispensaries. And so their point is that they're giving the industry a bad name. We're trying to do this legally. We want to be able to sell cannabis in our towns, and we can't, and they can. And there is an element of it that is just kind of unfair and for people who are trying to play by the rules. But yeah, we need to fight the recriminalization of all this activity. They kicked a door down in Binghamton recently when guns drawn and they're selling plants. Like it can't happen again.
Well, let me just say this. I was at least I'm happy to hear that you weren't wholly supportive of this hemp stuff. You know what I mean? Primarily because of it's discriminatory on its face. Even when you begin to throw in the piece about the mentoring and the whatever that 3-month course is, certain people are prohibited from even participating. For example, there's limitations towards people that have criminal records. They can't get any of this a type of assistance. And why would people come all the way up to some farm, a white farm, to have a white farmer show them how to do something that they may already know how to do, and that there are plenty other people that are out there that have more expertise than these folks. So
to get the paper.
Just to get the paper.
You guys are
got
also
the paper,
about,
man.
You
got the paper. That's what it takes.
Yeah.
And I think what needs to happen clearly is that all of these legacy constituents are going to be, running after the train after it's left the station, unless they can get to the point where they can start writing this legislation themselves, where they can write the legislation that on-ramps them into the legitimate industry, and they have enough clout by numbers or cash to put it on the legislators' desks and say, pass this.
Yes.
Well, that's one of the things we're trying to do with the Social Equity Coalition. You know what I mean? We've sent letters to the government. We were asking for provisional licenses in the middle of last year.
Yeah, but how do you do the provisional licenses? Like, I asked for provisional licenses for every Black-owned farm in the state of New York, and that would immediately trigger a lawsuit because you cannot advantage one race over another in a legislation. It would just trigger a lawsuit that would shut it down. And so we couldn't do members of a Black Farmers United. We couldn't do a registered Black farm. We couldn't do members of like any kind of like diversity and equity community. It would all trigger lawsuits. The state, it's almost like the system is set up to let down the social equity community because you can't. Affirmative action is legal in the state of New York. It's illegal in California. That's why California has stuff like you have to live in this zip code for 15 years during these years because they know that's going to actually impact the community they're trying to serve without saying Black or brown or whatever. Because affirmative action is also legal in the state of California, and so your hands are very tied when it comes to directing the benefits of this industry to the communities you want to see benefit. Just from a legal standpoint, the lawsuits, there's people waiting in the wings to sue for every little thing.
Well, we know that the whole affirmative action was a shill game. It started out originally trying to redress past practices and discrimination, and then it became diluted into quote unquote diversity as a legal argument and justification. And it just means that the legacy market has to understand where its interests are, to pool its resources, and to hire those legal experts who can define the legislation-proof legislation or lawsuit-proof legislation that can get implemented. And there are loopholes. There are loopholes.
I'll just say about the hemp farmer bill, like one more. So yeah, I didn't support it. I voted against it with the board, but we're a Democratic. We represent our members. We're a lobbying group. They lobbied for hemp farmers, and they were strategic and they were successful. And if anything, it's a lesson. A lesson that I learned from watching them do it. Because I didn't believe they would ever get that bill passed in the state of New York. I really just never. I doubted it. I'll just say that there's other ways to benefit Black growers, cultivators in the future through simple solution offering to the state of New York. And because the hemp farmers came in with a solution for legislators to a problem they had, which was getting product on the shelves by the winter. And they offered a solution that was really an easy solution for them to implement. The solutions that we need to come up with to benefit social equity growers need to follow that similar framework. Like one solution very specifically that I'm working on is all the dispensaries, 50% of the products that are sold through those dispensaries need to be produced and grown by social equity businesses. Mm-hmm. That's a simple regulation that they can put in that would benefit Black and brown growers for decades. Mm-hmm. And it would create a pipeline for their products. And that's something that we can just push in Albany. And it's a simple line that they can write in to the regulations that would benefit these growers in perpetuity, not just upfront licensing like the hemp farmers got. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's the way I'm looking at it now. Like I've been upset about, the lack of equity in this initial licensing, cultivation licensing period. But I'm also encouraged by like all the things that the state are willing to do and implement to make this to get this industry up and running. And ideas like that, mandatory requirements on shelving in dispensaries can have a ripple effect that affects businesses 10, 20 years from now.
So we actually have to start wrapping up. This has been a great and lively conversation. So I think we want to go around and give everyone just some parting remarks before we close this out. So we want to start with Dr. Robinson.
Well, I think parting remark is just to organize, stay involved, and put together the kind of legislation that you feel addresses the issues that have not been addressed at the state. This is an opportunity to get in on the ground floor and start creating the legislation. And I'll be glad to work with anyone in terms of that. Where I can be useful.
Okay, Damian.
Yeah, I would say, the biggest takeaway for me so far with the rollout is people really got to they got to care. They got to care how this is happening. It's not, when we were fighting for, decriminalization and then legalization, it was very easy to rally people around legalizing the drug. It's getting more complex now. It's getting into the regulations, but it's everything. And so I think that a lot of politicians are expecting people to, it's an election year. And I think like the press conference that they've got planned is exactly the type of stuff that should be going on to let Albany know we're watching, we're holding them accountable, we're paying attention to the implementation phase. And this is where everything is won or lost. And the next few years will define what this industry looks like 20 years from now. And so everyone needs to be paying attention to all the details coming out of Albany with regards to implementing the MRTA.
Okay. Mikhail?
Yeah, first, I want to thank you for Alicia, for inviting us to have this conversation, and thank you for posting one of the action steps that we are taking to do exactly what Damian said, to let the legislators know that we are paying attention. The New York, the coalition, the Cannabis Social Equity Coalition has been organized in part to raise the voices of those that have been most harmed by the legislation. And so what we're doing is trying to bring to the attention of the legislature. We're watching, and as has already been said, do not relegate and make an effort to relegate Black and brown people to just a low-hanging fruit with respect to this industry. Limiting the social equity funding to dispensary runs counter to the legislation's goal, as has already been said by Damian and others, of awarding 50% of the license to the social equity applicants. Mm-hmm. When there's an effort to limit the social equity funding to a dispensary, that amounts to, as we say, consigning, the people to the less lucrative sectors. Limiting mm-hmm. the social equity group to dispensaries ignore some of the other aspects of the legislation. For example, community reinvestment. Mm-hmm. Limiting the focus just to the single license also gives these bigger companies and the ROs, the MSOs, was nothing in it about limiting those folks. Mm-hmm. In addition to monetary support, perhaps the bill should, include a regulatory support for the social equity population as well. There are a lot of things that they could actually do. They could also, include in some provisions for community-based organizations to be more involved in state-run incubator programs. There's a lot that can be done to as they intend, redress some of the harms that have resulted from the way the laws have been specifically designed to economically and politically disempower Black people.
Yes.
So we're gonna, again, go up to Albany. We have to raise our voices. We have to ask to be included in the conversations. As Damian said, we're in the middle, like the political football. Everybody's talking about how they're trying to help the social mm-hmm. equity group, but no one's even listening to or creating space for the social equity group to even be included in the conversation. Mm-hmm. And so if you have a situation where people are speaking for you or trying to speak for you and telling you what's in your best interest, that's not social equity under any kind of scenario.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well,
so you guys have been listening to Soul Lounge Primetime on WHCR 90.3 FM, also live on YouTube and Facebook. You can always find us on Monday nights. I want to thank these three guests for really insightful commentary, mm-hmm. and we will be back on this issue. We've been covering
this topic for sure. NightWatchman
on this for several years, and we will be there till the very end until we have what we're looking for. So
And we're going to be looking for you, Dr. Robinson.
Okay. All right. Good.
We're going to be looking for you.
I'm putting that. You saw I put that right in here.
Yes, listen, man. I'm gonna grab that. I'm gonna grab that like pronto.
And Damian, any thoughts about bringing the curriculum up to CCNY?
Oh hell yeah, let's do it. Okay. Let's do it.
Damian.
All right.
I've been trying to get in touch with Vickiana Reyes about just doing that. So
that's perfect.
Send me your contact info.
All right.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Gentlemen.